The obvious question that comes up when talking about Deep Dungeon 3 is what are Deep Dungeon 1 and 2? They were simple little RPGs released on the Famicom Disk System by DOG, Square's publishing label for smaller developers. Well, DOG was a disaster, and the Disk System is just about dead. So when it came time for Deep Dungeon 3, it was released on a cartridge. The Deep Dungeon series is by Hummingbird Soft, who are best known for, well, the Deep Dungeon series. Their other major success was a series of RPGs on computers based on Lodos Tosenki, or Record of the Lodos War, as you may know it. The story of Deep Dungeon is that there's a kid, there's a dungeon, there's monsters coming out of the dungeon, so the kid decides to kill all the monsters. Now you might think I'm being reductive there, but I really am not. The game has a battery save, and let's take a quick look at the other players on the cartridge. 2 other games, and neither progressed beyond level 1. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that's a bad sign. In fairness, I had a saved game on here that I deleted to make this video. It was at level 2. When you start the game, you're given the option to create up to 3 additional characters who will represent your childhood friends that decided to follow you into the murder hole. The main character is always a swordsman, but you can choose among 3 classes for the other 3 characters. So yes, you're obviously going to choose one of each. Those classes are Hunter, Priest, and Mage. Once you pick out names for everybody, we head off on an adventure. And the very first thing you're going to notice is that Deep Dungeon 3 is a cheap wizardry clone. In fact, it reminds me of the wizardry clones that I used to make back when I was a kid. Very basic dungeon design, a minimal amount of equipment and options, and you pad the game out by making progression incredibly slow. In Japan, the people who remember Deep Dungeon basically remember it for that. The bargain bin wizardry that you got because you couldn't afford wizardry. But there's deeper problems with it than that. Let's say that a character dies. In that circumstance, your best solution is to hit reset and just reload. You can walk back to town and pay a whole lot of money to get them revived, though early on you're not going to have enough. Or you could always go back to the inn. There's an option there to remove a character from the party. Then you could just create a new one and... whoops! There is no way to create a new character. You can only create characters when you're starting a whole new game. And believe me, I spent a lot of time going, well, this can't possibly be right. Read through the manual, checked with all the houses. Nope. You can permanently remove a character from your party and then be permanently stuck down a party member. So moving past that, the town in Deep Dungeon 3 is another dungeon floor, but there's really only a few things that matter here. The equipment shop, the item shop, the inn where you can pay to spend the night to recover, and you can save your game, the temple where you can heal status effects and learn new priest spells, and the mage school where you can learn wizard spells. And then you just fight your way through the dungeon. As you move through the dungeon, the enemy encounter rate is based on time, not steps. So if you stand in place for a while, you'll get attacked. There's a huge variance in both enemies and how much damage they do. Enemies that can hit you for 1 damage might also be able to hit you for 15, and that's on the first floor of the dungeon. These skeletons are much nastier than all of the other enemies on the floor, so when you encounter them, the best option is to just run away. The wild swings of the random number generator means you pretty much just have to hang out near the stairs until you're about level 4. However, as you increase in levels, the size of the enemy groups you encounter also increase. The game is trying to keep pace with the player, but it's already very unbalanced. You can press the B button while you're walking around to open up a menu, and that has the usual inventory stuff, cast a spell, get your status. There's also talk on the menu, which implies that you'll encounter people in the dungeon to converse with. Deep Dungeon 3 was followed up by Deep Dungeon 4, but that one wasn't published by Square. It seems like there was a big push for Deep Dungeon 3, or at least I found lots of advertising material and tie-in books. And I get the impression that the game was not a success. My impression from the time I spent with it, before I apparently hit the really steep experience curve, was that if you absolutely, positively had to play a dungeon crawler, yeah, I suppose Deep Dungeon 3 would do it. However, this is a game whose only claim to fame is that it looks just like a better game. That is not a ringing endorsement for the Deep Dungeon series.